What we saw in the mines of Appalachia. Every old-timer in Alum Creek has their own version of what happened. Hell, even half the young people think they know how it went down. Don't listen to anyone who wasn't there. It's like that game we used to play as youngsters where you take a piece of yarn tied to two cups and pass it around a circle, repeating some message. Telephone, that's what we called it. Only difference is that in telephone, the story starts as something simple and gets more and more ridiculous as it goes. But this story? It gets more and more plausible the younger the teller. Almost like it's too much to be believed, so listeners correct for realism when they retell it so as not to sound crazy. My own grandson told me the other day that I remember it wrong. That it was all just some tragic accident and an albino bear. Something ain't right about that. 12-year-old kid telling his grandfather what he should and shouldn't remember. So don't listen to the young people. They weren't there. Truth is, most of us old folk weren't there, neither. The way we talk, you'd guess every miner in town was caught up in it all. Like how every boomer will tell you he was at Woodstock. It was only maybe 20 of us. Of those, a sight more than half are dead and buried. Except for old Ross, he sang. Bastard had himself cremated. I'll start over, you'll forgive me if I repeat myself. 1956. Like near every other young man, I worked the mines. Hard work, but honest. Plus, nothing else paid as good. Nothing I was qualified for, at any rate. And I had a wife, one child, and another on the way to support. Besides, my friends were miners. Ralph Hatfield, Ross Chnick sang, and Sid McNamara. We'd usually hit the bars after work, me leaving early on account of the family, and Ross he would order juice. Now, Ralph didn't much care for the bartender. Most of us didn't. Jesse Feld tended bar not because he was especially good at it, but because he didn't have the stomach for man's work. He even hired kids to mow his lawn and do landscaping. Wasn't ashamed of it, neither. Thought it made him smarter than the rest of us. I don't know if I ever caught Jesse in town without some fool sideways grin. Ralph suspected that Felt got his job by sleeping with the widowed bar owner. I didn't think so, but it wasn't impossible. Jesse had taken the first fruits, if you'll beg my pardon, of at least 2 girls in town and had nearly half a dozen ex or current lovers. He was smooth with women and had a pretty face. High cheekbones, sharp nose. That was enough reason for most of us to dislike him. Ralph had more claim to hate Felt than most. Y'all who aren't from West Virginia probably know all about the Hatfields and McCoys. But that's water under the bridge compared to the Hatfields and the Felts. See, during the Cold Wars, Hatfields fought for the Unions and Felts owned the mines. But if you gave Jesse a hard time about it, he'd come back with some quip. Felt was always a funny guy. That, combined with the fact that he never got angry, kept the rest of us from truly hating him. Save Ralph. June 10th was when it all started. Cicada season. They were bad that year, too. So many damn insects you could hydroplane on their guts if your tire treads were bare. The mine was a haven from them. For the workday, at least, you didn't have to listen to the never-ending screech. But this season the mine was even worse than the outside. It echoed. It isn't even pretty sounding like a cricket. Least not to me. So it's no wonder we worked deeper in than usual. We got far enough that we couldn't hear a peep and went to work. A couple hours into the day, I spotted a neck into a new room. But this one was real narrow. As in too narrow for most folks to fit through. But Ross he was a skinny guy and could damn near fit through the bars on a baby's crib. Anytime there was a crack the rest of us were nervous to slide through, Sang had it covered. We waited around for no more than 10 minutes before Ross he squeezed back towards us. I'd never seen the man so excited. Stop all other mining, he said with a thick accent. It's a treasure room. In most mines, the demolitions expert calculates the proper amount of black powder and then everyone draws straws on who has to light the fuse. But most mines didn't employ Sid McNamara. The craziest son of a bitch I ever knew, Sid did all the blasting himself. He loved to be as close to the explosion as sanity allowed. Most of us figured he'd go the way of his Ireland-born grandfather and die in such a blast. But he blew the neck wide open without event, and we all had a look for ourselves at Rossi's treasure room. What we saw was a gold mine. Well, no, it wasn't. It was a coal mine. But it was a hell of a lot of coal and mighty easy to collect. The owner was ecstatic. He hired everyone in town not already working for him at twice the normal rate. Even Felt couldn't resist a few weeks of hard labor for that kind of cash. We worked like dogs all week, taking as many hours at double pay as possible. Predictably, Jesse was the laziest of us all, but we needed him to have enough energy to pour our drinks after work, so no one said a thing. Now, I'm not sure who saw it. I want to say it was Felt, who came strutting back with a proud smile to tell us all of his find. If my memory serves, and it was Felt, that's what they call cruel irony. Anyway, Felt or whoever it was found yet another neck, one wide enough that anyone could walk through. The new room was small, but filled with coal. Loose coal, too. That should have made us wary. Coal doesn't just sit on the surface, stacked knee-deep, ready to be scooped into bags. But we were greedy. And now we had 2 rooms to work. A handful of guys I barely knew worked the smaller room. We called it the pirate's chest. I'll admit we were greedy. We robbed pillars and were too aggressive with the cutting machine. But that room should not have collapsed. I've been in natural collapses before. This was not one of them. Some of the miners will tell you that everything was quiet and normal, like right up until the cave-in. But no, there was one sound. That sound haunts me even still. Most rational explanation is the men in the pirate's chest shouted before the rocks gave way. But I know what I heard. It was a scream, all right, but not a human one. It wasn't a shout of anger or fear. If you ask me how I figure a demon might yawn, I'd tell you I don't have to guess. I know. That sound? That was us waking something up. Something buried under all the coal. The 3 or so men working the treasure room got sucked under that big pile of black like there was some giant hoover underneath. Then the collapse started. It was the big chamber that went first. The one me and my buddies were working. That hallway Sid had blasted out fell in on itself without so much as a groan to warn us. Most were able to run through the corridor in time and make it out. A couple were buried in the rubble, crushed flat as pancakes. Hooper Collins had his leg pinned under a boulder, which would be the death of him. 19 or 20, I think. Guy had a pretty wife and no kids by her yet. Death sure knows how to pick 'em. Anyway, when the dust cleared and I was through coughing, I noticed poor Hooper hollering and screaming. I did my damnedest to roll the rock off his femur. Hadn't finished before Ralph screamed and pointed. Couple of the new recruits had rushed into that small room to avoid the boulders. Stupid bastards. Now, the screams I heard next definitely were human. I didn't watch, but you can't mistake the sound of flesh being yanked apart. So I gave up on Collins and ran for the rest of the survivors. I've tried to forget how he begged me not to run. The words he used. I failed at that. I ran. Not far, just around a corner, and soon every healthy body was huddled around a cave-in, desperately tried to dig out. It was futile, but I jumped in anyway. What else could I do? When the screams stopped, the eating began. It must have gone on for half an hour. Tearing, cracking, suckling. We all knew what the entree was, and each of us dug all the faster. Eventually, of course, the panic wore off and we had time to think. What was back there? More importantly, what would it do when it finished its meal? And we all knew that we hadn't made progress escaping. West Virginians are just stubborn, I guess. As horrifying as the rending sounds were, the silence was far worse. The dinner was done. Hopefully, it was filling. Damn it, everyone stop. We need to figure this out, screamed Sid McNamara. The Irishman held up his lantern and we all faced the light. Over a dozen of us were huddled, some crying, others had shat themselves, but all of us were shaking as if naked in a blizzard. We took a break from the frantic digging and shut up for a moment. All but Rodney, the preacher's son, who fell to his knees and wouldn't stop praying no matter what the rest of us did. Rodney wasn't half as holy as his father, but at least one of us asking heaven for help couldn't have hurt. Finally, someone spoke. Ralph Hatfield. He always had a clear head, even did a couple years of college. He kept his voice lower than Sid had, what with the creature right around the corner, so we leaned in. It'll take days to dig ourselves out. That thing'll get us if dehydration doesn't. And it's guarding the TNT, if that becomes our only option. We can post a watch. Guards to make sure it doesn't come in here. It was Jesse what said it. Trying, poorly, to maintain his composure. Are you volunteering? You'd rather stand around and dig like the rest of us, said Ralph. No, I dash. Most of the water and lights are in the room with it, said Sid. We've got it outnumbered. Can it die? Of course, said Ralph. I read a whole issue on undiscovered species in the National Geographic. Most life in the ocean is unknown, and there's all sorts of cave creatures we never knew about. This thing is an animal. Animals can die. What's it eat, then? I asked. No one responded for a minute, then Ralph nodded. The coal. Coal's energy, too. Made of carbon, just like living things. There's beasts out there that digest minerals. They call them lithophils. Now, I can't speak to the accuracy of Ralph's claims or even the exactness of my memory, but I'd like to think Ralph was right. It was an animal. Don't know that I believe it, though. Around that time, Rodney stopped muttering and shouted at us. It's no animal. It's no natural thing at all. Shut up, man, hissed Sid through his teeth. It's a demon, drawn to our greed and wickedness. Rod, please, said Jesse Feld, in a whisper. We need to repent. We need dash. I think it was Sid that walloped him in the back of the head. Not hard enough to knock Rodney unconscious, but with plenty of force to knock him over and shut him up. God damn it, I said, and a few of us took a step back. Right away, Ross he knelt to tend to Rod, giving McNamara a sharp glare. No one else seemed to care. I don't know of many animals that can survive being hit with 8 pickaxes, said someone whose name and face I can't recall. 9, by my count. It was Ralph. He didn't have to tell us the math, that there weren't enough axes for everybody. Rod could barely walk, and Paul had a broken arm, which left me and 2 others to fight with rocks. Sang was a little luckier. He kept this special blade on him everywhere he went. They call it a kirpan and it's this longish dagger with all sorts of ornament. In the 50s in Appalachia, a knife wouldn't bother anybody. Shoot, back then it wasn't uncommon for a guy to walk through town with a 6-shooter on his belt. None of us had a gun, of course, but I would have traded my rock for a good knife any day. Biggest threat here is going to be friendly fire. Who was the fella who said that? Can't get his name. I remember his stories, and that he'd been a sergeant in Korea. Damn. Age is a hell of a thing. Anyway, the vet advised us a bit. Watch where you swing, but don't stop hitting it until it stops moving. We quickly drew up a battle plan with Sarge's help. Who'd approach from what angle? Pairing up with battle partners. The longer we waited, the more we feared we'd lose our nerve. That the creature hadn't made a sound for so long only added to our worries. Was it planning something? Was it even smart enough for plans? As a unit, we rounded the bend and shined our lanterns best we could. Half the standing lights were out, and of the remainder most were knocked over. Little strips of white shined in random directions like some sort of plaid pattern. But unless it was hiding in the shadows. No creature. Blood and gut trails told a story. That the thing had drugged the dead into the pirate's chest to feast. Hooper's leg was still pinned under the boulder, but there was no sign of the rest of him. No one was eager to be first in line, so we crept towards what had to be the monster's lair real slow. Weapons raised. About halfway there, something dropped onto us. Or rather, onto Sarge. We hadn't figured an attack from above, so the whole plan was shot. Half of us ran, half attacked. I did a little of both. Before I go farther, I'll try my best to describe the creature. Just keep in mind this was nearly 30 years ago, it moved faster than a rabbit, light was scarce, and I only ever got a real good look at it once. At least with my eyes. Can't count how many times I've seen it in dreams. But I suppose I saw it well enough for any man. I'm certain it was tall, but how tall I can't even guess cause it was bent over with the twistiest damn pretzel of a spine I ever saw. At least 4 legs and as many arms, and at the end of each limb a dozen fingers. Or maybe they were antennae. Tentacles. Those spindly legs on a shrimp. Shit, I don't know. I know it didn't have eyes. I remember that well. It only had one thing on its head. The mouth. A cross between the tail of an earwig and a crocodile's maw. But boy, was it skinny. Too skinny, for how strong it was. And the flesh didn't look so tough. Translucent. Almost worm-like. Fortunately for it, it had armor. Chitin, I think it's called, if it was a bug. But the plates intersected more like the shell of a crawfish. Any more description would be stretching the truth on my part. Whatever it was, insect or crustacean or demon, it tore the sergeant apart in seconds. I couldn't bring myself to charge in close, so I threw my rock at its head. May as well have thrown a beach ball. Even the axe swings of hardened men weren't making cracks in the carapace. I grabbed the pick Sarge had dropped, or had his hand been lopped off. Either way, I almost stepped in when the thing grabbed Ralph. I'd like to think I would have helped if he hadn't acted first. Sang stuck that holy dagger of his into the monster easy as cutting cake. Your guess is as good as mine why it worked. Maybe the dagger was better quality iron than the picks. Maybe something else. But the thing recoiled without making a sound and Ralph was free. Lucky stab or not, 2 more bodies lay at the thing's feet, and there was nothing to do but run again. At least, that's what everyone thought who wasn't Sid McNamara. In the ruckus, he managed to find and light a stick of dynamite. "Keep your distance, boys," he shouted, running back to the fight. Don't get any romantic notion that Sid was a martyr. I knew the man as well as anybody, and he had no intention of dying. Just like he had no plan to slip on a pile of guts, twist his ankle too bad to stand, lose his grip on the explosive, and fail to catch the monster in the blast. All but 1 or 2 of us cleared the explosion, not counting Sid, who went out like everybody had guessed but in circumstances an oracle couldn't have predicted. At least we were alive. Our eyes and ears were none too happy. But the monster seemed worse off, skittering about in random directions, tripping over itself. A sound-driven creature, blinded by the noise, maybe. It didn't even react to Rodney screaming for heaven to save him. We didn't have time to play guessing games, or grieve our friend's death. We had to leave. Ralph spotted our way out. A chimney blown open by the blast. We'd have to brave the middle of the room, praying the monster would avoid us with its random shuffles. And it would take 2 men to reach the opening, one on the shoulders of the other. What choice did we have? We went for it. I recall Jesse felt weeping as he climbed onto my back, and for a moment I judged him for it. Until I realized I was crying, too. To his credit, Felt found a ledge once through the opening and did his best to pull the rest of us up. Halfway through, Felt and Sang and a couple others having reached safety, the monster grabbed someone. Matthew Stewart, I believe. No one watched him die. And no one tried to help him. I confess feeling a bit of relief, thinking the catch will distract it long enough for us to climb. A sinful thought, sure, but I've committed worse. 8 or 9 of us were left, and of those 2 had lanterns. We shined them upwards, and would you believe that we couldn't even see the roof? I don't know the odds of that. A passage appearing right above us. Straight shot to the surface. Praise Jesus, we've been delivered, said Rod. No one could really argue the point. We climbed. I don't know for how long. It was tiring work, but adrenaline's a powerful thing. At first, we braced our backs to one wall and used our legs along the opposite. Then it turned into more like a steep slope we had to scale with our hands. A few outcroppings gave us chances to rest. Sometimes, the mouth would widen, and we could offer support to the weaker men. Others, it would narrow and we'd have to squeeze through one at a time. In one such shaft, we lost a man. A wide frame can be a blessing or a curse in a mine. And Liam was just too stout to fit. Even with someone pushing from under and pulling from above. It didn't take long until Liam was wedged so tight, he couldn't even go back down. He would have needed to break his shoulders to move. Ralph offered to do just that. Yank his arms out of their sockets, that is. And keep on climbing how? Liam asked. Then, still stuck, the man pulled out a pocket knife, and cut his own throat. No. Rodney screamed, and all I could think was how fortunate I was to be above him rather than below. It did take breaking his arms to dislodge his corpse. He didn't mind, just fell 10 feet before sticking someplace else. There'd be time to pray for his soul later. We kept on for as long as we could, which wasn't long. No, a few minutes later and we came across the worst thing any of us ever had seen, not counting the monster. The ceiling. On cue, one of the lanterns went out. It can't be, whispered Rodney. We're trapped. The odds of it coming out to the surface were always slim, said Ralph, no emotion in his voice. I just wish we had a few cigarettes to share. What time is it? I asked. Dark, probably, by now, said Ralph. Then they'll send somebody. Where Jesse's confidence came from, I can't say. But I envied it. Maybe there's already a rescue party digging through the rubble. We'll all be home by morning. Is that what you want, Felt? It was Ralph. All our friends and fathers getting themselves killed. No, of course not, come on, Hatfield. I just mean dash. Shut up, said Ralph, and he did. No one said much of anything for the next hour. A few sobs, even a couple grim chuckles. I reckon most of us accepted the inevitable in that time. A small part of me held out hope for rescue. There was no way to warn the rescuers, if anyone was coming. Nothing to do at all but wait and make peace with our Creator. Then the last light went out. I doubt you've ever experienced a dark like that one. Sure, maybe you've experienced pitch black. Maybe you've been underground. But I'm talking about the kind of dark that fills your insides. Where even a pair of eyes 3 inches from yours don't glow. The kinda dark so deep you know you won't ever see light again. The little room we'd sat ourselves in felt an awful lot smaller all of a sudden. And the rocks scraping my back became harder to ignore. There's no one on this earth who I'd wish that sort of death upon. Being buried alive. I would have traded anything just to stretch my arms out. In a way, it was almost like drowning. I'd nearly drowned, once. 12 years old, tried to impress Susan by swimming across a lake. It was fun, at first, until it hit me like a baseball bat how much water was between my feet and the lake's floor. I remember clearly how oppressive all that water felt as my head sunk under it. An older girl saved me, then, and I didn't even have the wherewithal to be embarrassed by that. Dying underground was similar. All the stone above and below me for who knows how far. But no 11th grader was coming this time. Of all the things to reach out in mercy, it was the moon. A little stream of blue light above our heads. Took our eyes a bit to adjust and even make the light out. I thought I was hallucinating, until Felt shrieked in joy. The chimney did go all the way to the surface. But only a tiny slit. Not near enough to scurry up. It was like Artemis herself was teasing us. That's the moon goddess, right? Right. I can do it, said Rossi. The hell you can, snapped Ralph. Hey. Rossi placed a hand on Ralph's cheek. I can do it. Have faith. Okay, said Rod. I have faith. Sang took off his boots and his jacket, spit on his palms, and steeled himself. Rossi, I said. I have faith, too. I'll be back, he said. With a whole bunch of people. And guns, added Ralph. Rossi smiled. And guns. Before he left, he paused. I thought he was second-guessing himself, then he handed me his knife. I thought your religion said you always had to carry this. Sang just laughed. Then up he went. We couldn't see him climb, mind. He blocked out the light. But we listened for minutes as he wiggled through the impossibly small opening. At some point, his grunts stopped and I feared he'd suffocated himself. But then he shouted down to us. I made it. I'll be back soon. There still wasn't much conversation as we waited, but at least it no longer felt like drowning. Thank you, thank you. I'm done with drinking. I'm done with gambling. I'll never stray from my wife again, Rod prayed. Speak for yourself, said a fella I can't remember. First thing I'm doing when we get out of this is having a cold beer. Make that 3. A few of us laughed, a lot louder than the joke was funny, but then I heard it. SHH. I said, and everyone clammed up quick. The air wasn't quiet, though. We could all hear it. Liam's flesh, tearing. Then being swallowed. No, 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 said Rodney. We been delivered. Why is it back? We were delivered. Sang's coming with guns, said Felt. He'll make it back fast. It took that thing a while to eat the poor fellas last time. We have time. It had more than one body to eat last time, said Ralph. What if it finishes before Rossi returns? I'm not sure if I thought of it on my own, or if it's what Ralph was trying to imply. But a way to buy us a few precious minutes crossed my mind. I didn't voice the plan, though. It was just too damn mean. Rodney voiced it for me. An offering, he said. That thing down there. It's a devil. A demonic spirit. We don't know that, said Ralph. Rodney continued. It's a demon if there ever was one. Demons are drawn to wickedness like moths to a flame. Someone brought it here, and only an offering will satisfy it. An evil offering for an evil thing. What are you trying to say, Rod? Asked Jesse Felt. No one answered, for a moment, but the silence was broken by a bone cracking. Marrow being sucked. Monster was wrapping up his meal. Maybe you're right, Rod, said Ralph. Maybe this devil has wanted a sacrifice all along. Come on, Ralph, you don't believe in that sort of superstition, said Jesse with something that may have been a chortle under different circumstances. Oh, I'm not sure what I believe anymore, Felt. But I know that thing is hungry. And I've got a pretty strong notion who the most wicked man among us is. He comes from a long line of wicked folk. The next minute or two is a blur. Probably cause I've tried to block it out. But like most everything I've tried in my life, I didn't do it well enough. Please understand. I don't remember laying a finger on felt. Cross my heart and swear on my children, the way I remember it I stood back and watched. Even tried to reason with Ralph and the others to leave felt be. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head. Maybe 100,000. And I still don't remember myself as a murderer. But maybe the mind is more powerful than the soul, able to change memories as are too horrible to recall. Because I do remember my knuckles stained in blood, half mine, and half his. I remember looking at that flat as a washboard face, the punches of a dozen men having removed any evidence of Felt's high cheekbones and pointy nose. I remember how he looked white as marble in the moonlight. I remember his screams, his why, and, fellas, stop. Fellas. And I remember when words were replaced by pitiful gargles. Much worse than the creature, it's that memory which haunts me. I can forget it most days, but I remember every night. Whiskey helps. A little. And that's how you know if the old-timer telling you the story was actually there. That's how you can be sure. Before we tossed the body down the hole, we nodded to each other in a silent pact not to tell a soul what happened. We weren't even supposed to talk about it with each other, that was the unspoken vow. So if somebody knows about Felt, they were there, no mistake. I've often wondered if I could have stopped it. I knew it was wrong and I remember protesting some. I had the dagger. And I knew it didn't care for loud sounds. Could be if I was braver I could have used the knife and the knowledge to fight the monster off. But if I'd stood in the way of the mob, would they have killed us both? Not, however you cut it, I was a coward. Am a coward. I would have buckled for sure. I just wish Sang hadn't left for help. He wouldn't have let it happen. Ross, he was a good man. Made good on his word, too, but the guns proved unnecessary. The rescue party never came across the creature, coming straight back to the crag and digging us out. I'm guessing the monster left when it felt so many people milling around above. But it wasn't in the mine, when the townsfolk went back in to recover what little was left of the corpses. Most the survivors skipped town, moving with barely a goodbye to the friends and relatives they grew up with. One came back, eventually, but the rest I never saw again. It was just as well. With the biggest mine shut down, there was less work. The owner of the mines talked about reopening a time or two. Clearing the rubble. Most the workers threatened to strike if he did. I'd switched trades by then. Spent the next 20 years in lumber. But the mine's still buried. Way I hear it, kids go up there sometimes. To the collapsed mine. See who's brave enough to hike in and touch the big cursed rock pile. Parents say it's dangerous. Cave-ins and rattlers and such. Grandparents say it's dangerous, too, but for different reasons. It's still out there, somewhere. Maybe it's found another cavern to call home. Or maybe it never much liked being underground, and lives in some forest. Before we came along, my guess is it was trapped. And we loosed it upon the world. Guess I'll never know. Not sure that I'd want to. I'll be dead soon. In a box or an urn. Maybe Ross he had the right of it. Buried things have a tendency not to stay buried. I'd have myself burned, too, if it wouldn't cause an uproar at the church. Funny. Why should I care? Probably stepped inside that building less than 100 times, and those just for weddings, funerals, and Easter Sundays. There'd be a scandal all the same. I never made much trouble alive, I figure no use in starting after I die. Telling you the story, the whole story, even the worst bits, is my kind of penance. People should know what's out there in the dark as much as they should know what we did. On Judgment Day, when I have to look Felt in the eye and make account of how I've lived, things I've done, at least I can say I told it like it happened. Not until the end, of course. I guess I kept quiet about my sins during the golden years. So if the good judge sees fit to damn me, well, I guess I can't protest all too much. Maybe, in whatever hell I'm heading for, I'll meet the creature again.